This morning, a rape victim herself is speaking out from South Florida to Capitol Hill to help other victims of sex crimes, what she's hoping to accomplish by coming forward after a horrific attack. And this holiday season, you can prove it's better to give than receive by picking a gift that will make a difference from the Red Cross Holiday Catalog. Now, from CBS4 News, this is News and Views with Elliot Rodriguez. In for Elliot this week, CBS4's Cynthia Demos.
Good morning. 4 years ago, a man known in Palmetto Bay and Pinecrest as the daycare rapist was convicted because one of his victims went to court and faced her attacker in a grueling trial. He ended up receiving 7 consecutive life sentences. Well, now that woman is on a mission to help victims of sex crimes. She starts by sharing her horrific story. Now, the story you're about to hear, I guarantee you, is going to stick with you for a long, long time. I want to warn you, the details are graphic.
I get whacked over the head as hard, like somebody hit me with a brick. The first thing the man says to me is, "Do you believe in God?" I said, "Yes, I believe in God." And he said, "Then you're going to forgive me for what I'm about to do to you and your 2 kids.
Julie Weil, along with her 3-year-old Emily and 8-month-old Peter, were kidnapped 8 years ago in the parking lot of Emily's preschool, Old Cutler Presbyterian in Palmetto Bay. The attacker drove her and her kids to the Everglades.
At that point, he makes me take off all my clothes, and he raped me with my daughter sitting about 2 inches away from me. He said, "Ma'am, turn around, and this time I want you to look directly into your son's eyes." And as he was raping me, he said, "For the rest of your life, every time you look at your son, I want you to think about how this feels."
The details are very hard to hear, but Julie just started showing her face and telling her graphic story to moms groups like this one and to anyone who would listen, so women know to be on their guard at all times.
In total that day, he raped me 4 times. All 4 times, my children were either touching me or looking at me or sitting within 2 inches of me.
After 3 hours and 4 rapes, he returned Julie here, back to the parking lot of the preschool, where again, he threatened to kill her.
He says to me, "You know what? Before I make a decision on this, take your underwear and wipe down the inside of the car, because I don't want any fingerprints."
He then took off, but a tiny sample of DNA was left behind in the van. That sample was entered into the system and was linked to other women who were also abducted and raped. And the whole story aired on America's Most Wanted.
Miami-Dade cops called him the daycare rapist.
That led police to 41-year-old Michael Thomas Seibert. Julie was the only victim to go to trial, and he was sentenced to 7 consecutive life sentences. Now Julie's on a mission, not just to raise awareness by speaking to groups, but to get legislation in place. We went with her as she spoke to a legislative director at Congressman Mario Diaz-Balart's office.
I'm Julie.
Okay, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
She's lobbying support for the SAFER Act, House Bill 6085. It creates a DNA database to enter the results of DNA tests that are just sitting on the shelf from rape cases. The national system would link repeat offenders. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of DNA kits that just need to be entered. And Julie says the price is right. The U.S. spends $127 billion a year on rape cases. The SAFER Act earmarks $10 million a year. It's efficient and effective, Julie says, who's already spoken to numerous congressional leaders and continues to speak to groups of women or law enforcement or pretty much anyone who will listen.
I wish somebody had told me this story when I had little kids, because things might have ended up a lot differently for me.
And joining me now is Julie Weil. Thank you so much for coming in. Welcome to the show, Julie.
Thank you, Cynthia.
Now, how is it? You're so amazing. You're so strong. You're so able and willing to talk about this. How do you do it? How do you do it?
You know what? I think it's because I had such incredible support from that first 911 call all the way through the end of my case, and in fact, all the way through the appellate process, which just ended. Gosh, it hasn't even been a year yet since it ended. I received such great care along the way that really makes a difference. And I think that getting justice and getting those 7 life sentences just for my kids and being able to point to them and say, you know, for what he did to my daughter, he's serving a life sentence. For what he did to my son, a separate life sentence. That kind of closure, it's not a myth. It's something that's real and tangible.
Let's talk about that. You were the only victim to go to trial. How many other victims were there?
There were 3 victims total, And initially there was a plea deal that was trying to be constructed.
For about, what, 30 years or something?
For about 30 years. And although it would have spared me the pain of going through a trial, I just couldn't live in a world where this man would someday get out again, because I just didn't believe that he was the type of person who could change. I just don't think if you're capable of committing these type of crimes that you're going to be able to stop once you get out. So I made it my mission to make sure he was locked up forever. And the judge here in Miami made sure he was locked up forever 7 times over. So.
Wow, that's a great accomplishment on your part. What's it like for you? I saw when he popped up in the piece there, you kind of went, again. And it's been, he was sentenced 4 years ago, but the actual rape happened 8 years ago?
Yes, it was 8 years ago this October.
And even 8 years later, I mean, you never get over it.
You never get over it. I don't think any sexual assault victim ever gets over what happens, because it takes a piece of you. It's the most intimate, violent crime that exists. And when someone does that to you, it's not, you just can't forget. And
he was really, I mean, strange is not even, but barely covers the surface of it, but he would say to you things like, yell at you, and then he would tell you he loved you, and then it was this kind of bizarre.
And it had a bizarre religious bent to it. He would quote, scripture from the Bible. He would talk about his childhood growing up, with a drug-addicted mother, never knowing his father, how much he hated women from churches. Yet, in reality, that wasn't at all who he was.
He claimed his mother was a prostitute.
His mother was a prostitute,
Wasn't
when
true.
In fact she was the church secretary at a church in Pinecrest. And his father was a deacon at the church and was an ATF agent for the federal government.
Wow.
And so he spun these weird tales, and he would hit me and beat me, and then it was so loving, and he would quote the Bible, and he would just, flip on a dime.
Really disturbed person. And what a lot of people don't realize is that he actually had children of his own.
Yeah, by the time he was arrested, he had 5 children. Oh. His girlfriend gave birth 3 days before he was arrested.
Unbelievable.
4 boys and a girl.
I want to talk about your family and how they're doing, but first I do want to touch on the fact that because of your advocacy and because of your work, you have gotten legislation, a lot of congressmen to sign on to some legislation that is right now making its way through Congress in session right now. And actually, we saw you going into Mario Diaz-Balart's office in the story there, and since then he did send us a comment. He said, quote, "I commend Julie for her advocacy on behalf of sex abuse victims. She's serving as a strong voice for women who have been devastated by this heinous crime, and her courage is making a difference for rape victims everywhere." I sent you that when I said, Julie, I got this. What do you think of it? And you were just delighted.
I was delighted. And I, of course, sent it immediately to my husband and to my parents, because, they share in all of this, too, because they're kind of the people that are forgotten when a big crime like this happens. Mm-hmm. People focus on the victims so much, but they're victims in their own right. And I just wanted to let them know people are listening. I may be just one mom who lives in South Florida, but look at what one voice can do.
Well, they're listening to you because you have such a strong voice. You're like the ant that moves the mountain, Julie.
That's how I hum that song all the time about the ant and the rubber tree plant.
The rubber tree plant. And you also got not just Mario Diaz-Balart, but who else to sign on?
Debbie Wasserman Schultz from Fort Lauderdale. Ileana Ross-Leighton has signed on. Tom Rooney from Palm Beach County. Ted Deutsch from Palm Beach and Broward have signed on, and they've all signed on to co-sponsor the legislation.
That's amazing.
Which is fantastic. If you look at the list of co-sponsors, there's an inordinate amount from South Florida, and it makes me feel so good that the area of the country that I'm from and that I live in is throwing so much support behind this bill that's going to change the lives of women across America, hopefully.
And the bill would actually reallocate money that's kind of already there, right?
Yeah, it amends the Debbie Smith Act of 2000, which is a landmark DNA legislation piece. And as I think you showed at the beginning of the clip, $128 billion a year, $128 billion a year spent on costs related to sexual assault cases. This allocates $10 million to track DNA kits. And when you think about the potential that has to stop future rapes,
right,
it's just cost effective.
Cost effective is right.
Yes.
All right, Julie, we're going to talk about your family coming up also, because I want to find out how they're doing. But also, Julie was invited to Capitol Hill to talk about her experience going through the legal process in Miami-Dade County after she was attacked, what she had to say to Congress, and what Congress is hoping to learn from her story. When News and Views continues, stay with us.
Now, from CBS4 News, this is News and Views with Elliot Rodriguez.
Welcome back. Well, we've heard the horrifying details of what happened with Julie Deal Weil and how she stayed strong and worked with police and prosecutors to get justice. You know, in September, she took her quest for justice for all rape victims to Capitol Hill when she testified before the Senate Judicial Committee.
Although I was afraid of what my rapist might do to my family if I reported the crime, I soon called the police. The compassionate and professional responding officer and SVU detective who arrived at my house that night set the tone for how I would feel about my experience with law enforcement from that point on. Without that encouraging beginning, my story might have ended quite differently. Eventually, they took me to the Rape Crisis Center at Jackson Memorial Hospital in Miami. Thankfully, the police and the nurses at the Rape Crisis Center were all veterans in dealing with the unique needs of rape victims. The exam was horrible and very painful. Being poked, prodded, and photographed was almost too much to take. But the forensic nurse who stuck by my side helped me through the pain. The next few months were torture on my family. The police found no fingerprints and the Rape Treatment Center uncovered no DNA on my body. This was extremely disheartening news. However, a few days after the rape, I received a call informing me that a tiny speck of DNA had been recovered on my clothing. The DNA matched the DNA from another crime, but unfortunately the information was not in the system. In a city of millions of people, my attacker could be anyone. I was terrified. The Miami-Dade Police Force put everything they had into looking for this man. My relationship with the detectives in this case served as a source of strength for me in the agonizing months after my rape. Because they communicated with me and checked in on me, I felt like they were personally invested, and this gave me the strength I needed to continue forward.
Joining me again now is Julie Deal Weil. What an experience to speak on the Hill, huh?
It was unbelievable.
Great experience. And the reason they had you there was because your experience going through the system after your rape was positive as it could be, right?
Right. They had me testify after a woman who had had a horrible experience in Pennsylvania, who had been treated horribly by law enforcement. And I think that they wanted to juxtapose that against somebody who really, you know, had a positive outcome in the end, and not just a positive outcome, a positive experience all the way along and was well cared for. And there are not that many of them out there. I thought, having never been the victim of violent crime, that everybody in America was treated the way I was. But it turns out that really what happens here in Miami is the exception, not the rule. And it was my privilege to go up there and educate the senators on what we can do better.
So what does Miami do that other cities should follow? You called it the Miami model.
Yes, that's what I call it. It is amazing here. At Jackson Memorial Hospital, they have a rape treatment center that is exclusively dedicated to catering to the needs of sexual assault victims. So when you pick up the phone and you call 911, an officer will come out to where you are, and eventually, after questioning, will escort you to Jackson. And there you'll be seen by a forensically trained nurse, a medical director who has training in sexual assault recovery issues, and they'll stick by your side because the exam is incredibly invasive. People think that it's like CSI Miami, that it's a quick deal where you take a couple swabs and some fingernail scrapings. It can last 2 or 3 hours. And you want somebody who you can trust, who's, you know, an expert in gathering evidence that'll hold up in court later down the road. But you also want somebody to explain to you all the tests that they're doing for STDs and, you know, pregnancy prevention programs, and who will give you the context of the counseling that you need afterwards, not just for you, but for your family. Because when you go through an experience like that, you're too tired to look for that information on your own.
And you told me you felt like the people weren't just doing a job, they were truly, they cared about you.
Absolutely, because I don't think that you go into that line of work unless you really care about the people that you're serving. And I just felt well cared for from the beginning all the way through to the end. And what I found out after all was said and done, and I got back up on my feet and my family started to heal, was that this isn't the experience that women across America are having.
And the reason you spoke on the Hill was so that they can take this Miami model and kind of make it a regular system for everyone in the country,
I wanted them to see what a rape victim looks like when the process is well done, that there is life after sexual assault. And as a country, we can play a part in helping people heal if we give them the right resources. Because, trust me, I never imagined 8 years ago laying naked on the floor of my van, bleeding with my children watching me, that I would ever have the strength to go to Capitol Hill and talk in front of anybody about this. But because the healing process was set in motion in such a positive way, I did 8 years later. I mean, I still have effects from what happened, and I don't think that'll ever go away. But, you know, I redeemed my life, and, you know, I think good things are still happening for me. And a lot of people don't feel that way.
Wow. Speaking of the effects living on, how's your family? Let's talk about your kids.
Wow, that's always an interesting question because they really are the forgotten victims in sexual assault cases. But things are going well. My son is 8 now, and he doesn't remember anything from the crime, really. My daughter, she still has some effects because she was old enough to remember, and she talks about it still sometimes. My husband's very supportive of what I'm doing now, and I think that all this advocacy that I'm doing has really been healing for everybody because it's putting such a positive spin on a negative experience, and it's being received pretty well across the country. And watching other people, you know, turn their lives around and watching them thrive is very rewarding to us.
What can people take away from your experience? I know you speak to a lot of moms, and you're working to get this bill passed, and you're working with legislators. But the people, you know, watching right now, if they could take away a few things, what would it be? Well,
first of all, I would encourage them, if they have ever been the victim of a sexual assault, to get counseling immediately. Because although you may not think so, the effects of sexual assault are going to pop up in your life at some point. You need to deal with the issues. If you live here in Miami-Dade County, contact the Rape Treatment Center or the sexual assault hotlines, and they can put you in touch with fantastic individuals from all sorts of advocacy groups who can help you.
You know, one thing you told me that really stuck with me was that if there is a person approaching you that you think maybe something's a little off, to look at them in the eye.
Absolutely.
Because this guy wouldn't let you look at him.
Right. I think it's your natural inclination
Instinct.
to divert your gaze and
Right.
to not look at someone. And he admitted in his confession that he purposefully chose me because I never saw him. His other victims never made eye contact with him. And you can find this and other tips on a website that I started called keepingmomssafe.com.
All right, Julie. keepingmomsafe.com. And thank you for all of your work. You are truly making a difference.
Thank you so much for allowing me to come and speak.
Okay, we're going to watch the bill and watch it make its way through Congress and everything. Thanks, Julie. Still ahead, we do have some of the best holiday gifts of all, how you can help the American Red Cross bring cheer and support to those in need when News and Views continues. Stay with us.
Now, from CBS4 News, this is News and Views with Elliot Rodriguez.
Welcome back. The true spirit of the holiday season is definitely giving. That's the idea behind the Red Cross Holiday Catalog. It's an opportunity for you to bring cheer to someone who needs it, from servicemen and women stationed in Afghanistan to children just who need basic health services and the victims of natural disasters. And it proves the old adage is true. It is so much better to give than to receive. Joining us now to talk about the Red Cross Holiday Catalog is another Cynthia Gutierrez